Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Paul Jay. The report on torture conducted by the CIA that was carried out by the Senate committee has caused a great deal of controversy. Now joining us to talk about all of that is Larry Wilkerson. Thanks for joining us again.
Thanks for having me, Paul.
So there's kind of two parts of this question for me, which is, one is, first of all, why did the Senate get so up in arms about all this after rubber stamping the CIA for so long? Why now? Well, let's start with that, because my part two is actually a defense of the CIA. I want to defend the CIA, but I'll do that as first you answer the first part.
I think there are a number of reasons, but the two most important ones in my mind, and I think most would agree with me on this, most who understand this issue, is that first of all, the Senate Select Committee and the House Select Committee, the two intelligence oversight committees that were formed as a result of the Pike and the church commissions earlier in the 70s, didn't get the truth. Now, in some cases, Republicans mostly, I would suspect, my political party, they didn't want the truth, so they didn't ask the right questions. In other cases, the CIA actually lied to them. That's the CIA's business. They're the most accomplished liars in the world, and that's their business. They didn't tell them what's in this report. They just told them they were using enhanced interrogation techniques and so forth.
What do they call it? Giving you plausible deniability.
Plausible deniability.
Which they did. They gave them that.
Second, and perhaps more disturbing, if that's not disturbing enough, government agency lying to the Congress and its oversight committees, the CIA, I have to be very careful what I say here. The CIA had a mission that it botched. It botched horribly. It's as bad as the fact that they tortured in many respects. When you talk about the institution, you talk about what they did post 9/11, you talk about what they were designed to do in the 1947 National Security Act, what Truman and the Congress at that time thought they were creating and so forth. They have come to a pinnacle of incompetence, a pinnacle of being detrimental to the national security of the United States rather than positive. I'm not just talking about torture. I'm talking about all the things that institutionally produced a George Tenet, produced a John McLaughlin, produced a John Brennan, and produced a leadership that led this institution into what we've seen reflected only a small portion of in this Sissy report. Those two things, I think, meant you had to reveal this. You had to put this out. Now you can go on and say there was political motivation, that it didn't get a majority of the Republicans if it got any other than John McCain, and there's probably some validity to that. But when Diane Feinstein took the floor of the Senate and I rolled my car off to the side of Highway 95 to listen to her speak because I couldn't believe what she was saying, I regained a little modicum of faith in the United States governmental system. When I listened to her, I don't care why she was on that floor. She said the truth. You cannot let this happen in a democratic federal republic without doing something about it. And if all we do is reveal it in this heavily redacted report, that's not enough, I will admit, but it's a start.
Okay, here's my defense of the CIA. I was going to do this as a commentary for either your end, but we're running out of time, so I'm going to do it here. If you can apologize, cover up, defend an illegal war that killed perhaps 1 million people, a crime, I think, of far greater scale than any of the torturing. If you can conduct a foreign policy that allows that, and I'm talking now both Republicans and Democrats, because since President Obama has been in office, not only did he not charge Bush Cheney with conducting an illegal war, but he's been apologizing for the war ever since, even really defending it, then how can you talk about the hypocrisy or the practice of the CIA? That's even on a smaller scale. What else does one expect? If you're going to have a foreign policy rooted that we're going to dominate the world, if you're going to have a foreign policy rooted in we need to be the global empire, then you better be willing to have atrocities committed by your security services and give up your constitutional rights at home. Because they don't go together.
Why?
Because you're going to get blowback.
From 1950 to 1960, basically under the leadership of Dwight Eisenhower, We were arguably the most successful economic machine in the history of the world.
Yeah, I mean,
We had a security and a farm.
you had a kind of nice table set for you with all the major economies of
No
the world
question.
destroyed after
No
World War
question.
II. So.
No question. All it requires then is better leadership today.
No, not
Are
better.
you saying that the dominion of the United States is necessarily negative? I'm saying
Yeah.
that the dominion of the United States, economically, financially, name your poison, is not necessarily negative.
For
it could be
Americans, for
positive.
Americans.
No, for the globe,
Oh,
it
no.
could be positive.
Well,
If it were enlightened
wishes were
leadership,
horses. If wishes
it could
were
be
horses.
positive.
Well, I would submit to you that it has been positive from time to time under enlightened leadership.
I will give you a few moments of that.
And to say that
but-
you need an instrumentality like the CIA to be evil is to say you don't care about your republic.
When was the instrumentality of the CIA not evil?
When
were
it
these
was doing what its job
come
was
on.
institutionally
Organizing
designed
coups- organizing
to be.
coups in Chile, organizing
you're
coups
missing
in Iran.
50% or better of the CIA's mission. The designed mission
not talking
of the
about the
CIA
analytical part.
was
I'm talk-
strategic intelligence.
I'm talking about the operations part.
That's
When
not
was
even
that?
in the 1947 Act.
Okay, but it's certainly in their
was
in the real.
created.
It's certainly in real life and real practice.
was created
from
and it was-
Mossadegh in Iran to Lumumba in the Congo. Go on and on and on. This
I
is
will-
what the
I will-
operations.
I will
always-
readily admit if I were going to disestablish a portion of the CIA, that would be the first one, covert operations.
Yeah, but then you have to start thinking about giving up being the world dominant player.
No, you wouldn't. No, you wouldn't.
Well, we
Why
haven't
does
seen
the
it.
world's dominant player have to
'Cause it wants to-
overthrow governments in other countries? Why?
Well, we haven't seen it otherwise with this dominant player. They want to control the outcomes of all societies.
Well, that's a different proposition altogether. That's
Well, we
not a
haven't s-
democratic federal republic.
Okay, but that's a lot of people argue, including the libertarians who are consistent, argue you can't have both. You can't be empire and democratic republic. You got to choose one.
I think you're probably right if you're talking about an empire in the historical terms of empire, that is territorial aggrandizement and so forth and so on. If you're talking about an empire of ideas, if you're talking about an empire
Well,
of
I'm not.
intellectual concepts,
No, I'm
like
talking about-
Jefferson was talking about, like Washington envisioned, and he did. Washington was more prescient than Jefferson, Franklin. He might not have been that articulate, but he was more prescient if you read his letters. Envisioning an empire of enlightenment, an empire of rationality, an empire of freedom and liberty is very different from envisioning an empire of commercial or trade or territory or whatever.
But I'm talking about
We've just bastardized those ideas. In the
Okay,
process.
well then I'm talking about that. I'm not talking about your model.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the actual practice of empire since World War II, which starts with the bombing
Let's
of
look at your institution for a minute, the
let me
CIA.
bombing of Japan with nuclear weapons. Let's start from there, because
Well,
from that point on,
Let's just look, let's go right back down on the nitty gritty here with your institution, the Central Intelligence Agency. There are lots of people who work at the Central Intelligence Agency and at the National Security Agency and so forth. I would submit to you that my experience in government, now spanning almost 40 years, indicates to me quite solidly that 80% of the people at work there are decent, reputable, truthful, trustworthy citizens.
I have no reason to doubt what you're saying is true.
The fact that leaders like George Tenet and John McLaughlin and John Brennan and a host of others you could name and I could name corrupt the institutions they lead is not a reason to condemn those institutions.
Well, my point wasn't about condemning the institution. I started this off with the defense of the CIA.
I know.
What I'm saying is-
you're doing the Colbert well.
No. I mean it in this sense that it's like policemen. Policemen aren't. There's terrible violence of police against ordinary people in Baltimore where we're located. There's been many killings of ordinary people. And yes, individual policemen might be racist, but the real problem is the institution of the police is to be a buffer between people that own stuff and people that don't. So institutionally, they have to enforce laws that reinforce a whole set of social relationships that lead to chronic poverty.
Social relationships that were enshrined in our Constitution, as a matter of fact.
Absolutely. Because they defend property first and foremost. Yep. Okay. Same thing on the international scale. I mean, I'm not talking about a hypothetical model. The real practice of American empire over
If I lift that up, am I going to find Karl Marx's manifesto?
No, you could actually probably find Ron Paul's manifesto too if you want.
Might at that.
You might at that. The practice has been, and I'm quoting Larry Wilkerson, because you go back to the interviews that we're now going to post right next to this one, which was my early series. In fact, the first time we met, we did like a 7-8-part series, where Larry Wilkerson told me, American foreign policy is about commercial advantage. It's banal. It's about profit. It's about making money. And if your empire is about that, and then you have to assert military power to reinforce that commercial advantage.
What's wrong with making money, though, if you share that money equitably with those from which you extract it?
Nothing. It's just that isn't what's happening.
I agree.
Okay.
I agree. So the empire has gone haywire. We've
can
destroyed our own middle class. That's how haywire we've gone.
So what I'm getting at is, yes, I agree with that. So what I'm getting at is, with all the emphasis either on police locally, or the emphasis on the abuses of the CIA, and of course they're abusive and they're illegal and so on. But what we're asking of them institutionally is the real crime.
Is the corrupting factor. I don't necessarily disagree with that. I don't. The policy objectives we set before them.
Did you hear that, Carl?
Often corrupt them, yes.
And the same thing in terms of domestic issues, like in terms of people giving up civil rights. I mean, the whole rubric for the NDAA, where the Army can start arresting anybody accused of terrorism and throw them in jail without trial, the whole rubric for the Patriot Act, and all these things that are undoing any real sense of constitutional rights, is this blowback as a result of U.S. foreign policy. And I'm not saying it's not real. I mean, there was a real blowback, and frankly, what else are you going to do if you're over there? It's the only way you could actually fight back.
All right.
So this asymmetrical kind of terrorist attack on the United States
is clearly understandable. It's clearly understandable, even if it's exercised by someone like a thug, Zarqawi in Iraq, or by someone who's a little maybe above being a thug, as a Sediq like bin Laden, or anyone you could throw out and say, look, that person has a gripe, and there's no way that person can exercise that gripe in a political world, a calm political world of nonviolence. Therefore, they've got to be violent. Absolutely. I understand why blacks.
The biggest question in my mind about blacks in America, Paul, is why they haven't risen up and killed us all.
It's hard to follow that. In fact, I had such a good line ready, and now I can't think of it. What my major point is this. And I'm talking to people in Congress who voted for the Iraq War resolution. I'm talking for people even like President Obama that was opposed to the war and then defends that war. Don't cry so many tears about the torture when you're defending the death of maybe 1 million people killed in a war that was illegal. That's like
you got me there. I can't argue with that, except to say that we aren't going to do anything about the torture. So what about the bigger issues?
Yeah, that's the real question. Thanks for joining us.
Sure.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network. And don't forget, it's a year-end fundraising campaign. We can reach $200,000 if we can raise 100. Each dollar is going to be matched during this matching campaign. And this is critical for us. If we don't reach this number, we won't have enough money next year. This costs us about $100,000 a month to run the Real News. So please, click donate, because if you don't, we can't do this.